This screencast is going to look at the Angelina question focused on relevant costing principles. Again, as before, try and pause the screencast now and go through the full question, even to make attempt, particularly part A, part 1, and then work through the solution at your own pace when you've made an attempt at it. So the real focus today is going to be on how do we apply relevant costing principles, which are covered in class, to a one-off contract. Right, so again, a lot of the time what we're focused on for relevant costing is short-term, non-routine decisions. So in our case, requirement A1 asked us to assist Angelina's, Angelia's depending on the spelling there, consideration of the proposed enter contract. So we want to figure out what the relevant revenues and costs are. And again, we'd have talked about in class, how do we distinguish whether something is relevant or not, or whether it's irrelevant. We're applying relevant costing principles there, and then provide an accompanying schedule, essentially provide your workings and your rationale for whether you include something or you exclude it. So we're just helping you along in terms of understanding why a student leaves in or out a number. Then recommend from a financial perspective whether you accept the contract or not. And part 3 and 4 then are really sensitivity measures. So how much can the sales price fall before it becomes loss making, or how much can the price of cocoa, which is an input, rise before it becomes break even. So again, they're just looking at sensitivity analysis, not dissimilar to break-even analysis or margin of safety when we look at CVP. So we're looking at how much something can move before we're break-even. And typically in these questions as well, not just looking at the financials, you also discuss other factors. So think about HR, strategy, operations, your competitors, etc. But we'll come to that at the end of the screencast. So again, I'm assuming you've read through the question. If not, make sure you read through the full thing and pause it here. So what we're looking at here is a one-off contract, short-term decision, hence we can use relevant costing. It's essentially a big order for chocolates for an Asian hotel group. And they're looking for 2.2 million boxes of liqueurs, and they're willing to pay $7.25 a box. And what we're trying to figure out now is this financially worthwhile or not? And how we do it is we look for the relevant costs of the project and the relevant revenues. So what extra revenues are we getting from the project? What extra costs? And it's important then, particularly in terms of cost, that we only look at the relevant ones. Another way of looking at this could be, what's the minimum amount of money we need to get before this contract is worthwhile? So we're trying to figure out, is the contract worthwhile based on the incremental costs and the incremental revenues? Right? And that's essentially what relevant costing principles are. So we're going to set up a little table in terms of what the revenues are. And in terms of setting this out in an exam script, I might put a note here that anytime I have a working, I might go to a separate page and show the examiner, here's how I got my revenue figure. Here's how I got my cost figures. So for this, sometimes it'll be straightforward. Other times we may have to do a working or two. The first one is obviously your revenue. So if we go ahead with this contract, we're going to get 2.2 million boxes at $7.25 each. So it's 2.2 million times 7.25. So there's nothing too complicated about that. Just tidy these up. So you're getting about just under 16 million. So 2.2 million boxes at $7.25 each, and that's all you need to do for revenue. So it's all incremental. You're getting this because you take on the contract, so that's what you're getting. However, the problem is then, well, how much are we actually going to be paying? And we have to look through each of these different line items now, all the materials, the labour and the overheads, and figure out which costs are relevant and which are irrelevant. And again, remember, in an exam setting, as you'll see in the comprehensive solution, you need to articulate why or why not you leave something in or out. So make sure you always articulate in relevant costing questions why you're doing something. So the first thing we have to figure out is per box they use 1/5 of a litre of milk at 90 cents each. So that means the cost per box for milk is just 0.2 times 0.9, which is 0.18. And we're told here that milk is regularly used as a raw material in Angelina's products. And the current milk price is 90 cents, as it is there. And the company typically has an overnight stock of milk of 10,000 litres at any one time. Now, the key point is here is what's the relevant cost? Well, the relevant cost here is the 90 cents because that's how much it would cost today. The fact that you have a stock is somewhat irrelevant here because that stock was already going to be used in the business anyway. If it wasn't going to be used anywhere else, we may take a different item in it or a different cost. However, because it's going to be used regularly in the business, you're going to have to go out and buy each litre of milk at 90 cents. So the relevant cost here is 2.2 million boxes, because we're doing it on a total basis, times 0.2, because each box takes 0.2 of a litre, times 90 cents. So the cost for milk, and I'll put it in negative terms, is 2.2 million times 0.2 litres per box times 90 cents. So 396,000 euro is the milk cost. So you see how that's 2.2 million times 0.2 times 0.9. And again, in an exam setting, I might put a note there and show that calculation somewhere else on the paper. So we're just going to go through them line by line because we're explaining them. But when an examiner steps into your script, they want to see where your calculations are coming from. The next one then is the sugar. So you're told here, each of them boxes use half a kilogram of sugar at 38 cents each. However, we're told 150,000 kilograms of this type of sugar needed for the contract is already in store, and this is not used regularly. Right? So it was bought earlier in the year at 28 cents a kilogram for a one-off order, but again, it wasn't used. Now, if the sugar is not used in the Xanta contract, it could be modified for another 6 cents and used somewhere else. Right? And used in place of sugar regularly used at a purchase price of 35. So it has an alternative use, and it has another alternative use. It could be sold to a bakery for 33 cents per kilo. And the current market price is 38 cents. So this is a very good example now of opportunity cost. Think about what you're looking at here. You need a certain amount of sugar. And the actual amount of sugar needed, if we calculate it very quickly, amount of sugar needed is 2.2 million boxes times half a kilo each. So we need 1.1 million kilograms of sugar. So that's how much we need overall to fulfill this order. Now, in a matter of fact, we actually have 150,000 kilograms in stock. Now the question is, how much should we value that at? Because in reality, we have alternative uses for it. So there will be an opportunity cost. If we use it for the Xanta order, we can't use it anywhere else. And we have two alternatives. So alternative one is we could modify it at 6 cents per kilogram and then use it instead of sugar that costs 35 cents. So what that's essentially telling us is we could save 35 cents a kilogram if we spend an extra 6 cents. So the opportunity cost there is 0.29. Alright, so 0.29. That's the opportunity cost for alternative one. Because what essentially saying is, if we didn't use it in the Xanta contract, it would be worth 0.29 euro per kilogram, because it will substitute in for another sugar product that we'd have to buy anyway. So that's one use for it. The other alternative use is that we could sell it to the bakery, which is a bit easier to understand here, for 0.33. So if we don't use it in Xanta, we could just sell it straight to the bakery and get cash in. So again, that's the opportunity cost for alternative 2. You'll notice here that the 0.35 is the historic cost. That is irrelevant now because that's what you paid before. You won't be able to get that back now, so it's irrelevant for actually decision making going forward. What is relevant is, what could you alternatively use the sugar for? Where can you get the best value? And the best value here is using it for the bakery. So what we're saying here for sugar is 150,000 kilograms that are in stock are currently worth 33 cents each. And that's the cost you should put into your relevant cost analysis. Because what you're essentially saying is, if we didn't use that 150,000 kilograms for the Xanta contract, we could have got 33 cents a kilogram selling it to the baker. So that's how much should be charged in making the decision about the Xanta contract. So that's a very good example about opportunity cost, because you're foregoing this benefit by going ahead with the Xanta. So the opportunity cost there is 49,500. Now, of course, remember that's only a small portion of the sugar. We also need another. So I'll just open up this. We need another 950,000, because remember we need a total of 1.1 million. And that 950,000 we do not have in stock. So what we will do is we'll buy it on the market, and we're told the market price. So just tidy up this. For some reason it's not letting me do it. We will buy the 950,000 at 0.38, because we're told the current market price of the sugar is 0.38. So if you're going to buy any more, you'll be buying it at 38 cents. So that other 950 that you'll have to buy will cost you 361,000. So the total sugar cost will be 410,000. So notice there, if we ignored the current stock we already had on hand, we would get a cost of 361, and that would understate the true cost of what the sugar is, because we're ignoring this important, what's called opportunity cost, because we're losing out on the money we could sell or get from the baker if we didn't go ahead with the Xanta project by selling off the surplus sugar. So that essentially is a real cost in economic terms. Okay, so we've dealt with two of them. We've now the milk and the sugar. We've now liqueur. So the liqueur here, it does not use it in any of its normal products, so therefore there's no stock. So they're going to have to buy it all in at €10 a litre. And how many litres do we need? We need 1/10 of a litre for each one. So putting this line item in then, we're going to need liqueur of 2200, 2.2 million times 0.1 of a litre per box times 10. And of course both of them should be minuses because they're costs, and I'll put a minus in there as well. So that's a significant cost in the overall context so far, 2.2 million for the liqueur element of the chocolate. Alright, so we've 3 costs done. Our next one then is your cocoa, so the chocolate element, and we're told in note 4 they've not previously used this type of cocoa. However, there's significant volatility in the cocoa market, with prices ranging from 150 up to 4. And based on the current, so there is volatility there, but Jen's best estimate today is €2.30 per kilogram. So this is why we're going to be asked sensitivity analysis in the later parts, because we're not entirely sure what the market price will be. So we're going to use €2.30 a kilogram. We have to buy it all in because there's nothing there already. So it's going to be 2.2 million times 0.25 times 230. And of course that should be a minus. So about 1.265 million for the cost of the cocoa. And we're using our best estimate there, the price range, but it could be as high as 4 or it could be as low as 150. So we're not sure based on how volatile the cocoa price is in the market. But again, that lends itself to doing some sensitivity analysis to figure out what range or how sensitive is the overall project to the price of the cocoa. So we've 2 types of labour, grade 1 and grade 2. So we'll deal with grade 1 first. We need 1/10 of an hour for every box at €9 an hour. So what they tell us about grade 1 is all employees are already numerous grade 1 on a full-time basis at a rate of €9 an hour. For the forthcoming year, there is idle hours, so there is spare capacity of 40,000 hours. And additional temporary workers can be employed at this grade at a rate of $8.50. So the point about the idle hours is these people are going to be paid on a full-time basis regardless. So these 40,000 hours are a relevant cost. So there is spare capacity. So again, by utilizing that, it's going to have no extra cost, because those 40,000 hours at €9 were already going to be paid. So it's not incremental, it doesn't move. You're just making better use of it. So in this case, the grade 1, the total hours needed so if we look at the total hours needed, it's 2.2 million times 0.1. So you need 220,000 hours of grade 1, of which you have idle hours of 40,000. So actually you only need to pay for an extra 180. So remember, those 40,000 are going to be paid regardless, because you're told in the question they're idle, because the full-time workers are getting paid on a full-time basis. So although it's paid by hour, they're still getting a full-time wage in terms of whatever number of hours per week. So there is spare capacity there. So really, the incremental cost here is you wouldn't have to pay for those workers because they're getting paid anyway. So at least now you're getting a better benefit. And in terms of the minimum you can charge, you can actually even go lower price, because to some extent this cost is irrelevant. So the 40,000 hours is irrelevant for short-term decision making. Now in the longer term, and I can appreciate students will have other things to consider, and that could be a point you make in point B about if this becomes a longer term project. But what we're saying now is short-term benefit. This to some extent cost is not going to change. So when we call it an irrelevant cost. We're only looking at the incremental costs. What will change if we take on the project? What we will need to pay is an extra 180,000 hours at €9. So here it's minus 180,000 times 9. And that's one of the trickier things for students to get their head around. So what we're looking at there is, sorry, it's not 9, it's 850. Apologies. 9 is the current one. And again, that could be another point to remember for the part B, non-financial, is will that result in conflict if some portion of grade 1 workers are €9 an hour where others are on 850. And that is one thing to get their head around in terms of when you have idle hours, and students do struggle with that initially. The key concept is if it's not going to change because of the project, it's irrelevant. You were always going to pay that anyway. And the other grade labour is grade 2. And you're told here in grade 2, they need 0.4 of an hour at €10 an hour. So they need more labour, and it's a costlier labour. And we're told here, currently at full capacity, and you'll need to recruit them at a rate of €12 an hour from a specialist staffing agency, and that these workers will be 20% more efficient. Right, so this is tricky here, so to watch out for this. So in terms of grade 2 labour, they're at full capacity, so there's no idle hours there, so we're going to have to hire everyone in. But we're going to be hiring them in at €12 an hour, even though current grade 2 are only paid €10 an hour. So it's small things like that that I'm hoping students pick up on in terms of non-financial factors that could lead to conflict. The other thing you have to watch here is they're expected to be 20% more efficient. So when you're doing your calculations, you shouldn't be using 0.4 of an hour. You should be using 20% less than that. So actually for grade 2, the updated timing will be 0.4 times 1 minus how more efficient they are, which is 1 minus 20%. So they're actually going to be able to do this in 3.32 of an hour rather than 0.4. So that was a tricky thing to pick up in the question. You were told that these new workers you're going to hire are 20% more efficient in terms of the time spent per box, meaning they can do it 20% quicker. So you're now going to need total hours needed are 2.2 million boxes times 0.32 per box, 704,000, and the rate is €12 an hour. So minus 704 times 12. So that's about 8 million. So that's a significant cost there. It's grade 2 labour. And the key point again was to spot that you were to adjust the efficiency rate because they're highly skilled, 20% more, and then quantify the number of hours times the rate. And we've already picked up there might be a non-financial issue about varying rates of pay, both in grade 1 and grade 2. So that's most of our costs complete, except overheads. And remember, we know what overheads are. Overheads are indirect costs, and we're trying to figure out, well, are these incremental? Do they change when we take on this project? And we're told here they absorb overheads at a product at a rate of 40 cents per box. It is been identified that additional fixed costs will be incurred if the contract is accepted. And we're given 3 separate costs that are additional. And that's the key word there. The regular absorption here, that is not a relevant cost. That's an ongoing cost that would have been absorbed anyway, because you're essentially covering your fixed costs in your factory, your manufacturing context. What we're only interested in here is what's the incremental costs. So this will give us a minimum what the costs we need to cover. It may not inform us how much we should charge, but it'll tell us at a minimum which costs are we generating because we take on this contract. We're not generating these fixed manufacturing overheads because they're fixed, but we are generating additional ones. Although yes, they're fixed, they're in addition to what would have occurred before. So you're always looking for that key thing about what is incremental. And these costs are incremental because they're incurred if the contract is accepted. And it's 155 plus 135, which is 290. 290 plus 75 is 365. So it's 365,000. And our last one then is they've already incurred entertainment costs and developing the recipe of 45 and 10. These are known as sunk costs. And again, if you want to get your marks in the exam, you have to write down why you're ignoring them. These are past costs, and similar logic before, they will not change now. Just because you've spent the money doesn't mean it's a relevant cost for deciding what is a relevant cost in the context of the Xanta contract. So what you're thinking about here is, if I go ahead with this contract now, how much extra costs will I have? How much extra revenue will I have? Nothing to do with historic and nothing to do with the costs that don't actually change. What you're looking at is standing now, looking forward, the extra costs and the extra revenues, which we use the term the relevant costs and the relevant revenues. But again, to get your full marks, you need to explain the rationale for each item. So those other ones are sunk, so they're relevant. And as I go down, I will be noting my logic here, or in a separate page, in a workings page, why I'm including or excluding one. So your profit then, or your loss, for the overall project, accounting for the extra revenue and the extra costs, means you have a profit of 1.335 million. Now bearing in mind this only looks at the incremental costs, it doesn't cover in longer term the overheads, the longer term fixed costs, etc. This is really a one-off type project analysis. So that is a limitation, that if you're looking at a more longer term contract, you may argue other costs should be in there to make sure it covers everything to run the factory. But if it's only a one-off thing, we're looking to see, well, can we make any money off this, and that might contribute to the current costs we have. And that's why we only look at the extra costs and the extra revenues. So that is your A part 1, where we look at the statement of the relevant revenues and costs. From a financial perspective alone, should they recommend the contract? Well, financially, all you have to write there is, yes, they should, because it is profitable. So we're only saying from a financial perspective. Part B will then get into non-financial considerations. So part 3 of the question now looks to determine how much the sales price can fall before the contract becomes loss-making. So essentially what we're looking at here is, what's the break-even sales price? So this is a measure of sensitivity analysis to say, look, we know all the incremental costs. So all the incremental costs, we can tot them up here. The total incremental costs are about 14.5 million. And we know we're getting 15.95 million of revenue. And there's a number of ways of going about this. I'll show you 2 shortcut methods, and then I'll show you how it might be done in Excel, because it's a very handy function, and we have a goal seek function in Excel that may be useful to you in your workplace as well. So two obvious ways of going about this to figure out what's the break-even sales price, other than going trial and error, is to say, well, if the total profit, so I'll just come down a small bit here. So we'll say, if the total profit is 1.335 million, we'll get the profit per box. So if we get the profit per box, we're saying, how much profit, just based on these, are we getting per box? We're getting 1.335 million divided by 2.2 million boxes. So I'll just put this out. So we're getting 61 cents per box. So if you think about that logically, that means the sales price can fall by this amount before it becomes loss-making. So we're essentially saying that's the buffer we have on each box, because that's the profit per box. So the sales price, which is currently $7.25, can fall to minus the 61 cent, can fall to $6.64 before it's break even. Alright, so that's one way of going about it. You say, well, figure out what the profit per box is, and then take that away from the current selling price to figure out what your buffer is. So that's one method of going about it. And each method is fine as long as you get the same answer. So you adjust the sales price. Another way is, and I'm sure students have figured it out, method 2 is total cost method. Take all the costs. What's the total cost of the project? Total cost of the project. We'll sum them up. I'll just multiply by -1 to get a positive figure. So summing them all up, all the total relevant costs we have are 14.6 million. And we'll just get the cost per box. Because of course the cost per box will then figure out how much revenue do we need to get per box for this thing not to make any money, but not to lose any money either. And the cost per box then is divided by 2200 million, which, if we go back, is your 6.64 as well. So looking at it from either perspective will give you what the break-even price is. And that's why relevant costing is important to say. We want to figure out at a minimum how much should we charge so we're no better off or no worse off than before. So at a minimum, how much should we charge so we're no worse off by taking on the project? Well, if we take on the project, we have an extra 14.5 million in costs. So at a minimum, we want to charge 664, so we're no worse off. And of course, that's really your starting point to your floor in negotiations. The final method is an interesting one. Now, you won't be examined on this, but it might be useful in your own work to use the goal seek function in Excel. So how this works is, you go up here. Now I'm just going to split this off, that the volume is 2.2 million and the price is 725. So I'll say price and I'll say the volume. And I'll just say this, the price times the volume gets your revenue. So what Excel allows you to do, and it can be useful when you have different inputs. So these are our two inputs, the price and the volume, and this is our result, the profit. And what we can actually ask Excel to do is do trial and error for us, so do it a lot quicker. So what we can tell Excel to do is, if you go to data and you go to what if analysis, there's a function called goal seek, and it's somewhat intuitive. We want to set cell, the profit cell, to 0 by changing the price. So you see the way the price has to be linked in, because it will drive what the revenue is. So we want to set the profit cell to 0 by changing the price cell. And if we click that, it tells us the price, the break-even price, is 664. So what it essentially does is it iterates itself within Excel and it tells us what the answer is. So we can do it in a formula, but in a lot of the time when you have a more complex one, goal seek can be very handy. So you might want to goal seek how many units to produce. You might goal seek what the cost per unit has to be to make a certain profit. So again, what you do is you go to data, what if analysis, goal seek. You want to set your result cell to 0 because we want the profit to be break even, which is 0, and we change cell E2, which is our price input cell. So that's our raw input cell, our assumption, and the answer is 664. All right, so 3 different methods there. Any one of them, of course you can't do option 3 in the exam because you won't have the benefit of Excel, but any of them are fine. Same logic now, determine the price of cocoa that will result in the contract making neither a profit or a loss, and comment on your result. So again, we know that the cocoa has a price range of 150 to €4, and we've assumed 230. So we want to figure out what's the break-even price here. What can the price go to before this thing breaks even? Now, number of different methods. First one, what we might do is, so I have the cocoa here. Again, you can't really do a goal seek when you have the inputs like this. So what I'll just do for your own benefit is I'll pull these down and I'll show you how to set it up. So for the cocoa, the kilograms and the price. So the kilograms for cocoa is 2.2 million times, let's get that right, is times 0.25. So you need 550,000 kilograms and the price is 230. So while I've just done it longhand here, you really need to break out the input assumptions so we can actually do our goal seek. So these are our 2 assumptions as before. Our kilogram assumption, which we're not changing, but we will change our price. So if you want to do the goal seek method, which can be useful, you do data, what if analysis. So maybe try this yourself to see does it work. You're setting the profit cell to be 0 by changing one cell, which is the price cell. So we're saying here the price would have to go to 473 if we round it before the contract will be break even, because in the cocoa it will go up to 2.6 million. It's currently at 1.25. It'll go up to 2.6 and the contract will be neither loss making or profit making. So that's the goal seek method of going about it. Again, very handy for complex calculations where you have a lot of different inputs that have a lot of moving parts. The other obvious way to go about it is you have a profit, again, of 1.335 million. Now you just want the profit per kg of cocoa, because you're saying that's the buffer you have for each kilogram of cocoa, how much it can go up by before it breaks even. So this is the more likely one you'd have to do in an exam. So it's 1,335,500 over 550,000, which is the kilogram of cocoa. So there's a profit per kilogram there of 243. So the break-even price per kg is the current price, 230, plus the extra buffer you have based on the profit you've earned per kilogram of cocoa, which of course gets you to your 473 as we've calculated with goal seek. So there's either way is fine. What you're essentially trying to say is how much buffer do I have? I have 1.3 million and allocate that across the basis you're looking at. Either the number of units sold when you're looking at sale price, or the number of kilograms of cocoa when you're looking at the break-even price of a kilogram of cocoa. And to comment there, what we were looking for you to figure out was, when I asked you to comment on your result, I really wanted you to spot that the break-even price of cocoa, the worst case, is out of the current range. So the recent quotes, the max was €4. So it suggests even at its worst of €4, you'd still make a profit. That the price of cocoa would have to go to 470 before things would be loss-making. So it suggests you're relatively okay in terms of the volatility in the cocoa market. And again, that's the types of things you're looking for when you're looking at sensitivity analysis, is trying to figure out how sensitive is this project outcome, i.e. the profit, to particular assumptions. Whether it's the selling price, whether it's the price of cocoa, whether it's the price of labour. There's a number of different things you can do, and that will differ depending on what business you're in. The final piece you'll typically see in a lot of these financial calculation questions is a little add-on piece about other factors. And a lot of the time other factors mean non-financial. Right? So when you get your solution, do have a look at the very bottom of the solution. I have a lot of different points that just to show you the scope of what will be acceptable in the exam. But what I'm looking for the students to do, the main thing is to apply your knowledge. So some of the points, and again I'm going to briefly touch on them, that we might have mentioned already is there's possible causes there for conflict in the labour between grade 1 and grade 2 within each of them if the different workers in grade 1 are going to be paid two different rates, the existing at €9 an hour and the new ones at $8.50. Likewise for grade 2 labour, the current employees are getting paid €10 an hour, but the new employees are getting paid 12. Now granted they are more efficient, but that could cause industrial relation issues if it's widely known what the pay discrepancies are. Alright. The other thing to know is, well, are they a valuable customer? So are they a reliable one in terms of paying on time? Have they any trade references? And particularly in terms of what's the longer term play here? That if this is a more longer term possibility of a project or a contract, you make sure you don't want to undercut your future negotiating stance. Remember, what we've been looking at here is what's the minimum you need to charge based on incremental costs. If this is a longer term project, more costs will be relevant. But for a one-off one, we're taking a particular viewpoint as to what costs are relevant. But if this becomes more longer term, you want to be wary of setting a price too low now that you won't be able to negotiate out of in the future. But again, from an examination point, what we're looking for is application to the facts of the case. Don't just give a generic checklist out. Try and be as relevant as possible to what you read in the question. And there will be some guidance in the question trying to get you to spot particular issues. Two particular ones there were around the different wage rates for the different grades of labour and the conflict that might cause. But there's plenty of scope for different points, but make sure you discuss why it's relevant, number one, and make sure you try and apply it to the facts of the case you're given in the question. So that was Angelina, a relevant costing question focused on both calculations from a financial perspective and also non-financial points.